Welcome, everyone. This is a special edition of Midnight Sun Bee Club monthly meeting. It just doesn't have very many members of the Midnight Sun Bee Club, but we do have a couple of guests. Today, we're very fortunate to have Karen Thurlow with us. I'll let her do an introduction in a minute, but she has a lot of experience keeping bees in Maine and now New Brunswick, so a climate that's similar to what we experience. Karen, go ahead.
So, hello, everybody. So I've had bees since 1978. Been a long time. I absolutely love bees, so I've been able to stay with it that long. I had an apiary in Maine. I had 150 colonies, 100 colonies. You know how it varies when you're selling nukes and making queens and combining things and splitting things and all that. So, but my main business in Maine was selling nucleus colonies and making queens to sell. And then I moved to New Brunswick, and currently I'm the chief apiary inspector for the province in New Brunswick. So I currently have 17 colonies of my own, and I'm trying to keep it at that number because I deal with everybody else's bees, but it's kind of hard because bees really like to reproduce. So that's me. So today I'm going to talk about colony raised queens. It's a method I used back a long time ago in the 70s. And believe it or not, varroa mites were not in North America when I started keeping bees. So that was something I had to adapt to. But I went from 2 colonies up to numerous colonies by using this method to raise queens. And then later on, when I had so many colonies, I grafted queens because I was selling them. But when I was making my own queens, this is the method that I used. And it's the method I currently use now because it's very simple. So now that my apiary is smaller, this is what I do for making queens. I use what's called emergency queen cells. So I want to break down this method so that it's easy to understand, because it is a very simple method. And if you think about it, some of the standard methods of raising queen cells are no more than emergency cells. An example in a cell starter, they're starting cells because they don't have a queen there, or they're isolated from their queen. So they basically emergency cells, only they're given queen cups. I don't give them a queen cup. I let them choose where to make those cells. And I also let them choose the egg or the first instar larva that they're going to make the cell from. I don't select larvae and graft it into cups. So right now, there's a lot of attention focused on queens, and queen rearing is often seen as best left to the experts. But in my opinion, the bees are the experts. So this presentation is basically about how I set up my colonies so they will produce queens for me. So, and there's 3 basic ways that queens are produced: as supersedure, emergency cells, and swarm cells. So we know that for those reasons, bees will raise queens. So I just kind of forced the issue with them. But the first part of it is for me, when I come out of spring, is I equalize my colonies. So that really helps them. A lot of people think about equalizing in the fall to get the colonies to go through the winter, but equalizing in the spring to me is just as important. So I want to make sure all the colonies came out healthy. I don't want to be swapping frames around if a colony is unhealthy with something like European foul brood or something to do with varroa mite problems. So first thing I do is check the brood, and it's not a thorough, I don't go right through every frame right to the bottom. I just pull some brood frames and make sure the larvae is nice and white and healthy and fat and shiny, and the cell cappings on the capped larvae is very healthy, not sunken in or chewed or anything like that. So equalizing will prevent swarming during the nectar flow. Then you can split later as the flow winds down, so you get the full nectar flow, or you can split before the nectar flow so that, you have nucleus colonies to grow during that nectar flow. And I find the bees don't fight when I equalize because I'm taking frames of capped brood or frames. I prefer the frames where the brood is emerging, and young bees are accepted and young bees don't fight. Fighting and robbing, I find, is really a fall issue when they know winter's coming and there's a dearth and they're kind of in panic mode. So when I equalize, this colony would swarm if I didn't take some resources away from it. So I'm going to pull some of my older capped brood. And if I can't tell how old the cap is, the brood is, I might pick a cap off and look at the color of the eye. Look how purple the eye is, or look if the antennae is wiggling, or if I may see on the frame that brood is emerging or the cappings are starting to be chewed. And then I would give it to this colony. Now, the reason I only want that mature brood is if I move open brood over to this colony, is all I'm doing is giving them more work. And I'm also giving them brood that they probably can't feed and they can't keep warm. So I want to boost them, not hurt them, basically. So this one would not produce honey. Would not be ready for the nectar flow. This one would swarm during the nectar flow, and this one is just right. And I feel like I'm telling a Goldilocks story when I say that, about this porridge is just right, or this one's too hot and this one's too cold. It always reminds me of that. But that's just how it is. They come out of winter at all different strengths, and I equalize. Now, for me here, I will be equalizing. I haven't really been able to, I opened every colony just very briefly about a week ago and made sure the queens were laying. Other than that, it's just been too cold. But this weekend, it's supposed to really warm up. So I'll probably get in there and start equalizing the colonies this weekend, the last weekend of May. And that's about the right timing for here, because we always have cold, wet springs. It's just rain for 2 days. So it's a good idea to do that before the flow. Even if you're not going to raise queens or make splits or anything, if you do that, you're going to have a better honey crop, because instead of having one colony that swarms and doesn't really make any honey, and one colony that's too weak and doesn't really make any honey, you're going to have two colonies that look like this that are going to make honey. So that's equalizing for you. So when I ask my bees to make emergency cells, I've got to give them the right ingredients, basically. So when a colony loses the queen, an emergency exists. So the statement highlighted and this on that page is a myth that I've heard many times from different beekeepers, that the larvae will be too old. The larvae may be fed a worker royal jelly for some time, so the queen raised has a reduced capacity of egg laying. But the bees are smarter than I am. They're going to choose. If I give them the right ingredients, they're going to make beautiful queens, and I have proven this time and time again. So there's a lot of myths about emergency cells. Another one is that queenless colonies are bad-tempered. I have found that not all queenless colonies are bad-tempered, as long as they have the ingredients to start a queen cell and there's hope for the future. I find that perfectly fine to work with. Emergency cells have been frowned upon in the past by many beekeepers as a means of producing queens, because they think, that the larvae is going to be too old, or it's going to be undernourished or something like that. But to me, I would call those panic cells, and emergency cells are not panic cells. Panic cells, and that might be a term you've never heard before, but panic cells are the larvae that are older because the bees have no other choice. That's what I believe about panic cells. they're giving emergency cells a bad reputation. An example would be, say a beekeeper isn't too in tune with their colony. They don't realize that they lost a queen. They see some queen cells. They don't recognize them as emergency cells, and they scrape the cells. And then what are the bees going to do? The only choice may be larvae this age over here on this very light comb, which is a bad age for making queens, instead of having this choice over here, which is the perfect age for making queens. These eggs will eventually lay down and dissolve into larvae. The outer layer dissolves and they become larvae. Or these are a perfect age to make queen cells out of. So I need to set them up to get what I want. I don't want to set them up to make a poor choice. And also notice how easy it is to see what I need on black plastic. I always use black plastic in my brood chambers, and then I use the lighter on my honey supers. So there's 5 instars of larval development, and you want eggs or the first instar for a good queen. So when I talked about the queen problems that people have, and you know, I got this from, there's so many surveys that we can take now, and 10 out of 8 provinces in Canada list poor queens is an example of why they're losing colonies or why they have problems with their colonies. And, you know, you see it all the time in every province, except Ontario happened to have a good year that year. That was 21-22. But I know they had a bad year too, because a lot of bees come from Ontario to pollinate blueberries, and we didn't get enough bees last year in New Brunswick. So Manitoba, they had other issues with wintering over also, but the overall in general, it's the complaint can be poor queens, poor queens. And in Maine, where I first gave this talk, the survey results on that was, you know, poor queens, summer queen loss, queen failure, winter queen problems. So as the mother of the colony, the queen traits, they really impact every aspect of that colony. So her reproductive potential is crucial to colony success. Now you can read this scientific paper, and I highly recommend it. On the video, you can pause and write this down. And I really recommend that paper because it talks about the royal subfamilies, that when you're giving the bees the choice to choose that egg, they're not really just choosing what's called their super sister. They're choosing the best genetics they feel their colony needs. Now, a super sister is worker bees that have the same drone and the same queen. Of course, they're going to have the same queen, but they have the same drone. And it used to be believed if they're the most workers in the colony, they're the ones that choose the egg that make the queen. But that paper actually disproved that. And there's a lot of writing on this page. So again, I would pause the video when you watch it and read the page, because it shows how there are royal subfamilies in honeybees, because they tested the bees for their DNA to see their relation, and that there's no favoritism to the patriline family's true sisters, that it's believed that there are what's called royal subfamilies, and that's been studied, and I really recommend you read that paper. So as an example on purchased queens, I took this picture off the internet, and I didn't, write where I got it from, because I don't want to badmouth any one particular place. But I always wonder, how can hundreds of mating nukes in one area like this actually have enough drones for each virgin queen to mate with 10 to 30 drones, or even more? They even proven that queens will mate with more. And on their website, it says amidst hundreds of other similarly looking mating nukes sort of like monotonous development of tract homes. They all look the same, and they do. And whoops, sorry. And it says if all goes well, after another week or so, she will begin to lay eggs and have the opportunity to prove herself as a quality mated queen bee for sale. I just don't see the quality anymore in commercial queens that are raised that way. They don't last very long. The bees supersede them quickly. I'm not seeing, for myself, I'm not seeing the quality, and that's why I take the time to raise my own queens, or basically now let my bees raise their queens. Now, for that breeding, for that virgin breeding, you need sexually mature drones, and that's very important. When I went through my bees, it's probably 5 or 6 days ago, I saw 3 drones between all of the colonies, just 3, but there was a lot of drone brood. And of course, when you, I have double deeps. So when I pull the frames, I'm breaking drone brood between the frames, between the 2 boxes. So I look at the age and I judge when my drones are going to be sexually mature. And so I judged that by the look of the drones, the size of the drones, my drones will be emerging in 12 days. And it's going to take about 12 to 15 days after emerging for them to be sexually mature. And some drones actually do sexually mature in 5 days, but not a lot of them. And some actually sexually mature in 20 days. So you really can't tell when they're mature unless you do what's called popping them. And that's squeezing their abdomen slightly so the endophallus pops out. So you can see this drone is sexually immature. It's very easy to see when you pop a drone because its endophallus is just totally clear. And it kind of reminds you of egg whites. And this drone is mature because the color is there to the endophallus. And that's very important to know when you can allow the bees to raise a queen. There's no sense in making a queen if she's going to be poorly bred, because a good queen will have 4 million sperm in her spermatheca. Now, the spermatheca is where the sperm is stored. So you can see this is multiple ovaries this queen has, and there's the oviduct where the egg comes out, and all these strands are like millions of strands of spaghetti. Back here it will just be a little tiny egg, and as it moves forward through the strands, it develops into a, the egg that we call that the shape like a grain of rice. And as she passes it through the oviduct, the spermatheca has a valve that puts 2 to 3 sperm on the egg to produce a female worker bee. So I do test my queens. But when I was breeding a lot of queens and selling them, I was testing them to make sure they were bred well. So of course a queen would have to be sacrificed for that. And you can see one of my test queens here. She was bred well. She had a nice white spermatheca. There was sperm in there. That's what's called a mating sign over here. When the queens come back into the colonies, if you hit it right, you will see the endophallus still in the queen when she just came back from mating, and she might carry that around for 12 or 24 hours before it's expelled, or the bees pull it out, or however it leaves her body. But that's what that is a picture of. And so you can see that a mature queen is going to be opaque, a virgin is going to be clear, and then a queen that's petering out is going to be translucent. So what I suggest is when you do lose a queen, or you're going to pinch your queen, say she's a drone layer, or say you lost bees through the winter and you do find the queen and she's not too rotten, I suggest you practice pulling out that spermatheca and looking at it, and you're going to know how long your queens are lasting and how well they were bred and things like that. So it's a good idea to get used to doing that, so you'll have a little more idea on exactly what your queens are doing. And when you notice your queen is failing and you're going to squish her anyways, or squeeze her, or drop her in a bottle of alcohol, I mean, just pull out that spermatheca. It's not hard to do. I use my pocket knife and I just put it back on the last segments of the body and pull what is the stinger of the queen out, and then parts of the organs come out in the venom sac, and the spermatheca is perfectly round little ball. It does have a membrane around it that you can kind of peel off easily to, see the true color of it. So that's, I call that the art of beekeeping. It's the ability to understand the bees. It really takes intuition and basically a lot of common sense and instinct and foresight and watching the plants, because the bees react to the plants. But this is all part of beekeeping. So you understand, what's going on in your colonies and why your colonies are doing this or that. So I always find that queens are best raised during the seasonal buildup. Select the colony, not the queen. That is so very important to, really keep some notes on your colonies. And if you kept notes last year, you're going to know what your best colonies are. The ones that come out of winter strong, they produce honey, they have an abundance of pollen and nectar. Colonies that you enjoy working because they're not stingy. Your beekeeping management is more important than the queen in genetics, really, because you can be a very poor beekeeper and the best queen in the world is not going to help your colonies. So the way you manage your bees is very important. And I always believe in local adaptable stock, not bringing, I don't like to bring queens in from other places. I always go for adaptive local stock when I can. And you have to be willing to call the duds or remove all the drones from the duds. One of my colonies actually turned a little bit, they're not stingy, but they get quite excited and they're running on their frames and they're flying all in the air when I opened them this spring. And I'll give them a second chance, but I know one thing, I'm going to be taking all the drones out on their frames. And I use what's called a cappings fork for that. And it gives me an opportunity also to look for varroa mites. Now, if I do that too soon and I stick that capping fork in there, they're just going to squish and be all milky. But I have to wait until they're a little more firm and they have a little bit of development on their eyes. And then I don't totally turn them into bee milk when I put my fork in there. So anyways, the worker size around the queen, the retinue around the queen, also gives you a good idea of the quality of your queen. Young queens tend to have a larger amount around them, and but queens raised from the first instar worker larvae is a high quality queen. And when you see that, you know you have a high quality queen when you see the bees gathered around like that. So young queens also. And I always, where I live, I have to consider the ability to winter over and not consume every speck of honey when they're wintering over, that they don't starve. And that is my colonies in the winter. They get a little more covered with snow with that. That picture might have been the end of December, first week of January. But by the end of winter, there's not even a hump of snow where they are. You wouldn't even know when you snowshoe out there that you're walking over the top of bee colonies. So as I said, you need to select the colony, not the queen. That's a very important thing, I believe, about, deciding which colonies are going to make you queens. Winter survival to me is a big thing. Hygienic behavior, the ability to detect and remove dead pupae is hygienic behavior. Varroa sensitive, VSH, is the ability for bees to detect Varroa in sealed brood and uncap infested cells and disrupt the reproductive cycle of Varroa. There's also bees with a biting behavior, which is heritable, and they bite the legs on the Varroa mites to, wound them or make them so they can't crawl around. And they fall down on your, through your screen bottom board or your bottom board, and they can't crawl back up. Those are developed by Purdue University. I actually had some of those in Maine. I can't bring them across the border, unfortunately, in Canada. But gentleness is very important, not being defensive. As you can see, I like honey production is a big one, winter survival, grooming behavior, not being real swami, and being gentle. Now, these gloves, I was in a bee yard in Maine, and I got a call from another beekeeper that they got into their colony and they really got nailed, and they couldn't even close the colony up. They ended up running away and hiding in their barn. And they called me, and so I closed up the colonies I was working, and I drove there, and this was his gloves. That's all stingers, all those little speckles, and what set the bees off, I don't know. I geared up, I dressed up for battle. I usually work in a t-shirt and a light white veil, but I put on my bee suit and got my smoker going and everything. And by the time I got out there, the bees were over whatever offended them or whatever the beekeeper did to rile them up, they had recovered from. So I just closed it up with no issue. So you have to, it's important to have bees you can work with. And then hygienic behavior, there's different ways of testing for that. There's going to be a new way to test for that. But what we were doing in the past was putting basically a can over a circle, pushing it into a circle of capped brood and pouring liquid nitrogen into that to kill the brood, and then 24 hours pull the frame out and see how much brood was uncapped to be removed. I did that one year with Marlis Spavic, and we had frames from Italian colonies and Canolian colonies. And the weird thing was, it took like 3 pours to kill the Carney larvae, with the Italians died in 1 pour. So they can, and I noticed that I have Carneys myself, and they fly in some wicked weather and some really cold, chilly days. And so they can really take the cold. And that really showed me that they could take the cold. I've had some Italians in the past because I used to do comb honey, Ross rounds, and they make the prettiest cappings, nice white cappings, because they have that little air bubble under the cap. And the comb honey could sell for a really high price. But I always preferred the Canolians, the Carneys. So colony selection for hygienic behavior is going to become a lot easier because Kara Wagner has developed this, what's called UBO, and that's her website. And basically what it is, it's a dead brood, it's the pheromone dead brood gives off, and it's going to be in a little container like this, and you're going to be able to put a ring there and spray it on the cap cells. So anybody will be able to do this test in their own bee yard very simply. The applicator is just going to be a vial filled with the UBO, and it can be reused. The sprayer can be reused each season in the ring. So you only have to buy these little vials once in a while when you run out. And then you'll be able to put the frame in for 24 hours and score the frame. So this would be a low score, of course, and that's medium, and that would be what I was looking for right there. So that's going to be a great asset, I think, to beekeepers and queen breeders. But it's so simple, anybody can use it. Where liquid nitrogen, you actually had to have a liquid nitrogen tank in your home, which I happened to have back then because I used to work as doing artificial insemination for livestock. So I was lucky I had a tank. So the abundance of pollen and nectar is really important, and it's important to know when your nectar flow comes in and to pay attention when pollen comes in and to learn what is called phonology. Phonology is nature's calendar, and the bees respond to what the plants are doing. So when where I live, we have maple trees, and I find that when the maple tree is a big nectar and pollen producer for my bees, and now they're just starting to be mid-bloom right now. So I know that's why today I was working on getting frames ready and getting foundation in and all of that, because I know in probably 6 or 7 days, I'm going to have to start splitting the colonies that I'm going to equalize this weekend, but there's going to be colonies I'm going to have to think about start splitting like the first week of June. So pay attention to your plants, learn your plants. What I use Google Calendar as a database because it's got a great search feature. And I write the first day I see dandelions or the first day I see colt's foot, and certain things that are happening around me as spring comes and summer and winter and fall and the frosts and all of that. So I can compare year to year. And I also keep really good beekeeping records so I can compare year to year. And that's going to really help you be a better beekeeper, to learn the plants in your area, to learn what your bees are working and what they're making their honey out of, what they're raising, what pollen they're raising the brood out of, and to learn what a nectar flow looks like. And what I usually notice right off is there'll be new wax on the top of the frames in the brood chamber. When a good nectar flow is starting, they tend to put wax on the tops of the frames, and it won't be old brown wax, it's going to be new wax. So dandelions is another big one that will come, but it's really not a big nectar flow for me. It's more the tree blooms. So the strength of a colony, when I make the queens with emergency cells, I keep my bees in 2 brood boxes. 2 deeps. I run deeps, and you can do this in mediums too. It doesn't have to be deeps. You need a nice, strong, healthy colony, of course. Any type of hive can be used that has 2 brood chambers, one on top of the other. You need to know where your queen is. You can put a queen excluder between the boxes and look for eggs to know your queen is, to know where that queen is, or you can shake them all into the bottom box so you know the queen is in the bottom box. I tend to shake them all into one box to put the queen down instead of it's much quicker than spending the time looking for the queen. If you're going to pull the old queen, so each box makes a queen, you're going to equalize those boxes. So if I'm going to pull my queen and make a nucleus colony, what I do is I pull the queen and I take 2 frames of cap brood, a frame of food with pollen on it, and a frame of foundation, and I'll make a 4-frame nuke, and I'll put that in another yard. I'll shake a bunch of bees in it when the forages are home, because I want the older bees. I don't mind taking older bees for that. So if you shake in the morning, you're going to get a lot of older bees. If you shake in the afternoon, there's going to be a lot of young bees because the older bees are out foraging. So the timing on when you're taking things out of a colony can affect the age of the bees you're taking out of the colony. So I pull the old queen. So to grow queens, you can grow queens in 1 box, or you can grow queens in 2 boxes. Last year, I grew the queens in 2 boxes. You're going to separate the forages from the young bees. I'll show you the method I use for that. The young bees end up moving. I equalize the boxes, so there's eggs and milk brood in each box. There's everything's equal in the boxes, but I got to have eggs and milk brood in each box. And they prefer new comb when they're drawing, newer comb, not old, really black, thick, heavy, old brood combs. You got to, try to have each box have some fairly new comb. You're going to make sure your queen excluder has no gaps. When you, if you abuse your queen excluder, the queens are going to go right through them. You never toss them around, or when you're prying your boxes open, try to keep your hive tool right on the edge, not in at the little bars, because the slightest little bend in that queen just squeaks right through. And they will move up. When you put this all back together, after you equalize the boxes, all the bees are down here because I shake them. But an hour, if I open this up an hour later, they're going to equalize themselves, and the young bees are going to come up here and cover that brood. And after that happens, that's when I will put in a double screen board. So I separate them as 2 colonies on one hive, one bottom board. So for 2 queens, I have, this is a cell builder and that is a cell builder. If I was only making 1 queen, I would leave my older queen down here and maybe give her another box, because she's going to need room to lay. And I will put a double screen here, and this box will make me a queen. But there has to be a double screen board or a cloak board or something between them, so that these guys know they're queenless and they're going to make another queen. So I go through both hive bodies, and I separate the eggs. I separate everything by age. I use 2 empty boxes. When I pull the frames, I put food and pollen and cat brood in one, and then everything really young in another. I use a shake tub. This is a shake tub here. It goes on top of the box on your bottom box, and you just shake the bees off. And it's not a big jar. It's more, I want to say it's more like a quiver the bees off, because you don't want to slam the bees off that frame down on top of these top bars. So no slamming, just to kind of get them off as gently as you can, but efficiently and fast. Now, Bob's has carpenter, a good team of guys working for him, and his shaker tub is nice and neat and tidy. Mine is, I made it just out of a really old inner cover. I got my tub from Walmart. I cut the bottom off. I put it upside down in the inner cover, traced around it with a Sharpie marker, and then I used my jigsaw to cut that out, and then I duct taped it all to the box. And because I have to say, I'm not a carpenter, but I can manage and get things made that I need made. So that's my shake tub, and that's Bob's. So anyways, the shake tub is really handy. I use it here when fall's coming and we're going to start feeding bees, we put all the brood in the bottom box, place for the queen to keep laying, and the queen in the bottom box, and everything that's food or empty frames goes to the top box. So when we get the food on them, it's the top box that gets really packed with food, because that's of course where the bees end up in the winter, and late winter is top box. So that's where you want a big bulk of your food. So I use the shake tub then also. So you're going to go through both both boxes, and sort those, the frames. And then you're going to equalize. You're going to distribute them between the 2 boxes. Now, evenly distribute if you're making 2 queens, but if you're making only 1 queen in the top box, you're just going to set that up like a cell builder. You can put some mature, emerging brood up there. Bees, you're going to have, of course, eggs and milk brood. I don't like a lot of like mid-stage fat white larvae. I would put that in the bottom box to be with the queen. I want the nurse bees to really focus on drawing me really great queen cells. Plenty of food, plenty of pollen. You can feed them. You can put on a pollen patty. That always helps too. And I can use this time also to replace old comb. I can pull my oldest comb and give maybe each box a frame of foundation, because the previous year, when I'm working my colony, I work the older comb out to the outside edges so I can remove those the following year, so there's not brood in them when spring comes. Sometimes there's little drone brood in them, sometimes there's a little honey, but I work my boxes that way. So I tend to take advantage and get a frame of foundation, pull old frame out of there. And I have to say, once you start using it, that shaker tub, you'll never go back. It makes splitting or moving your queen to the bottom box and things like that just so easy. So resources for making the queen, as I said, you need eggs or some milk brood. And that's actually, these are too old. That's perfect right there. So you've got to just be able to see that. Now, if you don't see eggs and everything really well, go to the drugstore and get a pair of reader glasses. That's what I wear. And you'll be able to see them. You don't have to have a decent eyesight, which you can create. And you can even put those reader glasses over your prescription glasses, because I've taught a lot of microscopy classes for identifying nosema and also for dissecting bees to look for tracheal mites, which isn't really a big problem right now, luckily, but people know how to do it if they've taken my class. And to dissect the bee to get the trachea out of the thorax area, it really takes great eyesight. So I would always keep a big bag of reader glasses at all different strengths and bring to my workshops. And so even people wearing prescription glasses would just put on 2 pair of glasses. I happen to have another pair here, just like that. And, get the strength they need to see that trachea, and it works out beautifully. So, just throw that in your toolbox. So also you need resources. You need nectar, preferably nectar and not all capped honey. If it's capped, pick some of the cappings off, use your capping fork and pull cappings off to expose the honey for the bees. And of course, a lot of good pollen. Bees emerging, I like, and those resources. So that's what you're going to look for to make what we call a cell builder. It's not that hard. It's just sorting a box of bees. Then the bees choose the cell placement, and they prefer, as I said, to build emergency cells on new comb rather than old comb. The building of the cell is less horizontal and less apt to be damaged if you're manipulating frames, because they lay closer to the, against the drawn comb instead of way out. They also will build them in, like if the comb on, say, wax foundation isn't right up against the sidebars, they'll take that crack there and put the cells in there. But they really prefer the lighter comb over the darker comb. And you can see these cells were built overnight. That's how quickly they will do it. Now, of course, I don't really want them to raise that many queens, so it would take out a couple of those cells and let them raise what I wanted. I can always cut some of those cells out after if I time it correctly, and I'll show you how to tell if a cell is ready to be emerged in future slides. But I can cut some of those out and move them into a queen castle or into a nuke or anything like that, because now I've got queen cells. So this is what I use. I use a Snellgrove board. It's just a double screen board. There's a screen on the bottom side of this board and a screen on the top side of this board. I put the opening in the back, but this particular board has doors. It has 4 doors that I could open. I tend to always just use the one in the back. And the top box gets the inner cover, leave a notch open on the inner cover, and the bottom box has the bottom board for the entrance. So that's how I set it up. So I can have the old queen down here, or I can have them making a queen in this box, and then my next box goes on top of this, and this would be the resources of the box that's going to go up there, and they will be making a queen, because the bees can't touch with the double screen board. They can't share the queen pheromone from the old queen down here to share with the bees up here. So these bees aren't getting queen pheromones, so they're going to make a queen. Now, when neither box has a queen, they really readily make a queen, and you don't really need a Snellgrove board for that. You can actually use a queen excluder that's kind of 3/4 covered with cardboard, just to kind of break it up a little. But then again, your timing has to be really good, because virgin queens can get through a queen excluder, and one of those queens are going to pass through the excluder and fight. So I prefer a double screen board, which are not hard to make. And they don't have to be as fancy as this one with the doors, 4 doors and all of that. It just can be, you know, a cut up old inner cover and put screen on each side or something like that. I just happen to have a friend that is handy, and he made me some because he knows how much I use them, you know. So when I moved to Canada, I couldn't bring any beekeeping equipment across the border starting from scratch. So luckily, some people have taken pity on me. So, and so if you don't want to, you know, purchase the double screen board or in your handy, just make something. They work great, and they're used for other reasons too, for swarming and things like that. And you can read about that. It's they're pretty handy to have. I put the inner cover notch down to let the forages continue coming and going that I used to using that notched cover. I have inner covers with notches. And if you don't use an inner cover, you can just use whatever you use on the top. But the important thing is that both boxes have ventilation. This box has ventilation because they're open at the bottom board and they can move air through this colony. And that, I consider that not a lot of ventilation, but with my inner covers having a notch, they get ventilation that way. I wouldn't want to open all these little doors up because if yellow jackets or something did want to start picking on them, there would be a lot of space for young bees to guard. But just consider ventilation also if you're doing this in warm weather. We don't get such really hot weather in New Brunswick. I'm in northern New Brunswick, right against the Gaspé Peninsula, across the bay from the Gaspé Peninsula. And our summers aren't quite as hot as I had in Maine. So for increasing colonies, this is really a great method because you can turn a large colony into 2 or 3 colonies very easily by pulling that queen, putting her in a nuke with what I call a 2-frame nuke. It doesn't mean there's only 2 frames in there. It means I'm starting the nuke with 2 frames of brood, and they will grow very rapidly with that older queen in there because she doesn't skip a beat. She just keeps laying up her frames. So, and if I can especially give them drawn foundation for her to work on, and they really grow fast. I can put a feeder on them, and I like to move them to another yard. You don't have to if you're not putting forages in there, you don't have to move them to another yard. And then if I have each of these boxes making a queen, and I've already pulled a nuke, this becomes a colony and this becomes a colony. So I could, out of these five colonies in this picture, I could make 3 colonies from each colony and end up with 15 colonies. And that makes a very quick way to increase if you're looking to get more bees. You can use food from another colony. If you have other production colonies, you can grab frames of food from that. You can use frames from your dead outs, providing you know why they died. It wasn't diseases or something like that. Sort your frames and, use those. Last year, I pulled old queens from 5 colonies and made nukes at the end of June with those queens. And so I was using those to produce brood from the nukes that I made from here. I just kind of mix things up pretty normally. So that's pretty much, this picture was taken August 12th, just before pulling the extra queen, and I had each box successfully made a queen. So here I have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. I have a lot of queens. So each box made 2 queens. So this picture was taken August 12th. So they were also making honey and they were making brood. And you can see, right, I have a queen excluder here between this box and there. So the queen must have been wanting to go up, but I don't really see any queen excluders and these other colonies. I just go by what's going on with the queen. She must have been going up for some reason, so I stuck in a queen excluder. This colony was making a lot of honey, so they got 2 supers. And it is kind of, as you work in the boxes, you are moving a lot of boxes, but I figure if I can do it, anybody can do it. But they're not that heavy at that point. And I use, go ahead.
Hey, Karen, could we go back to that slide just a second here?
Yes.
So I'm curious about the timing, which I know is going to be different and variable year by year, but you made those, this is a picture from August
12th.
And I think you said you made the splits in late June.
Yes, in June.
And so, and I know it's different by year, but after you make it, you started off with a very strong colony and 2 deeps, right? And
right.
So how long after you make the split do you add the queen excluder, or do you do it right away? Sorry, I said queen excluder. I meant super.
Okay. When that virgin comes back and she starts laying, I go by if she needs room for laying. I don't want them to backfill the frames, the drawn frames. So to avoid backfilling, when I foresee that's going to be a problem, I start adding honey supers to them. Now, the nectar flow every year is different. We do get a nectar flow in August because we have a lot of fireweed and other things that are blooming then. In Maine, that time of the year was always a dearth. So each place is different. So that's why I talk about really learning your nectar flows, because it's going to help you understand how to manage your bees. So you just have to look at your brood boxes and see if they're starting to put nectar where the queen should be laying, and add your supers.
Right. So if they're, so you would expect them to keep a center area clear for the virgin to lay eggs when she returns mated.
Correct.
Right. And so if you start seeing that get filled, that's when you add a super.
I get it. Well, I like it to be before it even starts happening. I pay attention to.
Sure.
My other colonies will help me know too what the nectar flow is doing. Like this yard was in a total different yard. And I will say that if you're trying to raise queens in a yard with a lot of colonies and a lot of activity, it kind of messes up the virgin. When she comes back and she's hitting like bumper to bumper traffic, she can end up in the wrong colony. I have seen virgins end up on the front of the bottom board of the wrong colony and getting balled by bees and killed because she kind of gets messed up. So it's a good idea to, if you're going to breed queens, not use this method, just breed queens in general, to have a mating yard. This happened to be what I called my mating yard. And you notice I have each box a little bit different. And every queen returned and every queen was bred. But also you got to consider predators that like to eat virgin queens because they're the biggest and the juiciest, I guess. When I was in Maine, I had a real problem with seagulls being the predator. So if you have better success, say in June, getting your virgins to return and not in July, consider only making your queens when you get the best return, because it's not the bee's fault. A lot of times it's what's picking on the bees. Now, I did not expect every box to make a queen. That's why I did it in both boxes, because behind these trees is a great big pond, and there's a ton of dragonflies in this particular yard. And there's another pond over behind, a few big hay fields. There's another pond with all dragonflies, and they will eat queens. So I really did not expect 100% success rate. If your average queen return is, say, 75%, by having 2 boxes make queens, you just increased it to 150%. So you're bound to get a queen. Either this box or that box is going to make a queen. And then you would just combine them together and put both supers on the top, and you've got a new queen in that box. Mine happened to be 100% successful in both boxes, so I had plenty of queens. And you just have to, you'll learn over time how good the yard is that you're trying to mate your queens in.
And now, if only one side one half, the top half or the bottom half makes a queen, or if you have a queen right split on the bottom and the top doesn't make a queen, you just recombine them, right?
Yeah, I just pull out the Snell Grove board and recombine them and put the supers on the top. The bees don't fight, they know each other, They've been living this closely, they absolutely know each other, and they don't fight. And of course I do it before robbing starts and all of that. I want to do that before fall signs start.
I just want to take a second and stress that, because most of our beekeepers have 3 or fewer hives and don't want to do never-ending expansion and the associated never-ending purchasing of new bee gear. So the beauty of this is you can come up with new queens, and you can end up with exactly as many colonies going into winter as you want.
Correct.
Which may or may not be, slightly larger. Some people want extra colonies going into winter to account for winter mortality. So,
right. And if I make 2 queens and I don't want to split my boxes, and I did not split these boxes, I pulled the queens and I combined them, then I have all these extra queens. What I did was I threw them in nukes with other resources from some other colonies, and I just had them lay up frames of brood. So the nukes that I did make that I was going to winter over ended up with enough bees and enough frames to get through the winter for me. And then when I was done using those little queen bodies, I actually gave them away to other beekeepers in my area that needed queens. I just put it out on email at whoever needs queens. I've got some that were mated this year. You can have them for free. They just need good homes. And of course, everyone left my doorstep very quickly. So it's great to be able to share, your resources with other beekeepers. We all have to support each other. It's a tough business.
Yep. It's so you were able to get all the queens you needed and use them as resource hives for a little while, and get excellent karma by giving them away to other people that needed them.
Yep. I made a lot of friends.
One last quick question here. If you end up with a new queen and an old queen and you only want one, do you give away the old queen, or do you occasionally kill an old queen? There's this.
Well, if the old queen's still good, I've always given them away. When in Maine, when I would finish up my queen breeding, and I would requeen a lot of my colonies, and the queens I was pulling they were only a year old, and they were still laying really good. I just had too many queens. I always gave them away to club members. I would always have a big queen giveaway. But the other thing I did, my brother's a beekeeper in Florida, and he can't really make queens down there because it's Africanized bees. He's down by Fort Myers, Florida. And I would go down and work for him in the winter. So I've worked with Africanized bees. What I would do is I would make a big batch of queens, and I would mail them to him in the fall so he could requeen colonies. And when I would go down there to make more queens for him, I would graft from those queens because I knew those queens didn't have Africanized genes. So, you know, that was another thing I was doing with queens when I was in Maine. But I would always, if there was nothing wrong with her and she was still a good queen and laying really well, and I was only replacing her for two reasons. One is I always had a lot of out yards, so I had to curb my swarming. So when I replace a queen in the summer and she's only 1 year old in the spring, she has a very strong pheromone. So the bees don't tend to swarm. They don't feel like they need to reproduce. She has plenty of pheromone to share with amongst a really big colony. And she also has what they call footprint pheromone. When she walks on the comb, she leaves pheromone on the comb. So the bees realize that they have a nice, strong queen. Swarming happens when they either you let them get too overcrowded, or when they sense their queen's pheromone is kind of getting weaker and they take off and they swarm and they want that young queen in there. But when you go into spring with a young queen, I always found my chances of swarming really dropped down to like 1%. I absolutely hardly ever had swarms. Or noticed that a colony swarms, or got a call from an angry farmer because the swarm was on his barn door or something, because I tend to keep young queens in my colonies. But that, you know, when you have out yards, you have to manage a little bit different than when you're in your backyard and you're looking at them every day.
Do you have experience with queens that are in their third year or older?
Yes, because my breeder queens were tested over time. So I had different colonies for my breeder queens, and they would be 3 and 4 years old and still laying strong because I was using my own stock for breeding. I brought in new stock, like I brought in some of the Purdue ankle biters. I brought in new stock to improve some of the genetics, but mainly I really developed my own stock over the course of a long time. So that's what I'm trying to do now. But boy, am I seeing a mix of bees, because I have a commercial beekeeper near me and he must be putting a lot of Italians in his colonies, because I'm getting I will have a pure black queen and she'll have this real golden blonde daughter. So yeah. But when I was talking about manipulating these boxes, I use this. It's just a bench from like Home Hardware or Home Depot or whatever you have near you. It's very inexpensive. It's just the right height to slide that box off onto that bench. So I'm not lifting, I'm only moving them. I'm not going from the ground up onto my colony. So if you're afraid of the weight when you look at a stack like this, I always say use your brawn, not your brain, because with being what we call the weaker sex, because I don't have the muscles like a man, I've always been able to manage my colonies in deep boxes because I use my brain, not my brawn, because I don't have a lot of brawn. So don't let it scare you when you see the stack of boxes like this. If you're not a physically strong person, either ask for help with another beekeeper, and they're usually always happy to, there's always people that want to be mentored, so you can always get help, or just get the right tool. So on September 9th is when I took the supers off these colonies. That's when they got combined. And for me, that's still a nectar flow, because we still have like the last of the fireweed and the goldenrod coming out, and that fall aster, and the fall, what I call the fall dandelion hawkweed. So there's still a little bit of a nectar flow, enough to combine those colonies together when I take the supers off.
So you want there to be a little bit of a flow when you're combining?
Yes. So when they're making the queen cells, you're gonna check for the cells and mark the frames so they know, you know where they are. I like to know where the queen cells are. I might just use a queen marking pin because it scrapes right off, or I could stick a thumbtack into the top of the frame or something. I just like to mark my frames. And as I said, you're most likely gonna find them on the newer comb. If you have newer comb that's got that milk brood and egg and that ends up in the center, that's most likely where you're going to find those queen cells. And also they'll make them on the edge if you're using wax foundation, and they tend to chew the sides and they're not right up to the end bars. That they'll make the cells on the edge. But you can check the colony in 2 days to see, you know, if they've started cells, and I've never had them not start cells. And so mark those frames. So this is this cell is 4 to 5 days old, and you can see the larvae here and see that great big pool of royal jelly, and that's what you want. If you're not seeing that, get food on them fast, get a pollen patty on there, get some syrup on there. Our nectar flow last year was so good, I didn't need to feed them while they were making queens. They did all of this with Mother Nature, which was great. These cells are 6 to 7 days old. See how much they've drawn them out. So they tend to clean the cells out underneath where they're selecting to have the queen. They remove any brood that's under there, and they start lengthening the cell. And then at 9 days, they cap. And then the queen will emerge 15 to 16 days. It's not exactly always 16 days. Now you see how you can see the cocoon. A queen does spin a cocoon in the cell. She just doesn't cover the top of the cell with the cocoon where the royal jelly is, because even after it's capped, she eats some more until she gets all the way turned with her head down, and then she's not eating that royal jelly. And you want it, usually there's always royal jelly left over in the top of that cell. So then the bees will start thinning the wax down. See how it kind of looks like a peanut, but they start thinning the wax down on the tip, and they'll take the wax right off, so only the cocoon is exposed. So when you see that, start harvesting the queen cells before you really see it that bald. But that's an indicator when you can start cutting the queen cells off the frame if you're going to move them to other places. Just watch the cells. Of course, I use a calendar, but the bees show you when that queen is getting ready to emerge. And also you can hear the queens piping in the cells too. So that's a good indicator. So in my experience, the first emergency cells are built with larvae at the right age. They always are. As I said, they're not panic cells, they're emergency cells. So there'll always be others the next day. These would have been eggs. So you notice these are capped and these are not. And when I showed you the age, 5 days old, not capped, and 6 to 7 days not capped, 9 days capped. So these would have been, when you look at a frame, there's some eggs and there's some milk brood all in the same frame. These would have been milk brood maybe a day or 2 days ahead of these cells. That's why there's some uncapped, and that's why there's some capped on the same frame. So they're going to choose the right age. And it may be that staggering that made people think that they were starting queen cells with the wrong ages or with worker larvae or something like that. But it just makes sense if you look closely at the frame before you put it in. If you say you took a close-up picture of the frame, you assume they're going to rear their queens on, you'd know the placement of larvae and eggs, and that would prove it right there. But that's been my experience, is that they're built with the right age. And the reason I'm seeing different stages of development of that queen cell is because egg, milk brood, milk brood, milk brood. What I call milk brood is the first instar larvae. So I know my bees know what they're doing. they've been doing this a lot longer than I have been, even though I've been doing it a long time. They do choose it. And remember, they'll chew away the comb and underneath and extend the cell downwards. And that's why you will find the queen cells on the newer comb. It's just easier for them to do that. So you see how they chewed away any larvae and reshaped it to attach the cells. Now, newly sealed queen cells should not be handled. They're very sensitive to temperature and also cocoon. Now, I showed you that you can check at 48 days and you can check a few more times, but just always handle them very gentle. Like, you don't flip the cell up and down. I see people look for the queen cell, instead of lifting it up and looking in for larvae, they turn the frame this way and that way. That just moves that queen all around. You could knock her away from the food, away from the royal jelly. You're going to have a very poor queen if you do that to the queen. The larvae can be moved away from that royal jelly, so just be gentle. And it's believed that the queen larvae, they don't cover the base of the cell with cocoon material, and they do keep eating when they're sealed until they're totally turned around, you know, facing the direction where they're going to chew out. So don't knock her away from her food source. And so as I said, prior to the queen's emergence, the bees are going to remove the wax cap and expose the cocoon. So here you can see that that's not even close to emerging. Now they've started chewing the extra wax off, and now this one's already emerged. They've chewed the wax all the way back and exposed the cocoon, and this one hasn't emerged yet, but you can see it's ready to, the cocoon is totally exposed. So if you're gently, you don't even have to pull that frame to see that. You can pull the frames next to it and then look down onto it. But if you want to be real nosy about the development, there you go. That's what you're going to see. So that presence of that exposed cocoon really will distinguish a queen cell, you know, that it's what stage it's at, you know. I really like that. So these are queen cells split open, so you can see there's still a great amount of royal jelly in there, and in this one's still up and eating. This is a bee taking the wax off the cell, starting to expose the bottom of the cell. Now that's a cell that a queen could have emerged from, and the cell, I've seen the cap flip back up and actually close so much that you wouldn't even know the queen came out of there yet. It is, you know, you need a magnifying glass to see this cell. But what is going on in this particular cell, because I remember this, there was a queen in there, and the bees, I guess they wanted insurance that they knew they for sure were going to have a queen. So they will guard that cell. They will keep the virgin away from it, even if the queen in here is piping. They'll keep the other virgin away from that. And they won't, as she chews around to, you know, open the cell, they'll reseal it with wax, and they'll keep her imprisoned in there, and they'll feed her through that little hole right there. And they'll keep her there for a while. And I don't know why they do that, but I've seen that numerous times, like an imprisoned queen, that they just keep there for a while. They don't keep her all, like, I haven't seen it past maybe 4 days, but maybe they're just making sure the queen that that emerged first is the queen they want. I don't, you know, who knows why bees do things. So I talked about, wait a minute, I went backwards, I think. I talked about moving the frame around too much and getting an elongated queen cell. This is going to be a really poor queen. Now, I got this picture from Facebook, and the person was saying, I am going to have a really big queen out of the cell. And I was thinking, you're going to have a very poor queen out of that cell, because the frame was handled too roughly, and the queen was knocked down away from her royal jelly, And the bees they just kept extending that cell. They elongated the queen cell, and that's an indication that the developing larvae dropped and the bees spun more queen cell material around her and kept feeding her, and the quality of it, that developing queen, will be really variable based on how much royal jelly she was fed. So that to me is going to be a very poor queen. I just couldn't believe they thought they were really going to get a queen that big out of there. It's like dragonfly size. So, anyway, I have found moving a cell is very easy. I cut them out, of course, with a knife. And even on a plastic frame, I just really go right against the plastic. I might even shave a little plastic off. And if they're attached to the wood, I will shave some wood off. Generally, you would put the cell on a frame with brood and up towards the center. In this picture, I was requeening a laying worker colony with a queen cell, and it worked out really well. They accepted the queen, but so that's why there's no brood on the frame. I had brood on another frame that I put next to this, but I just stick my thumb and dent the wax a little. And of course, we all know wax sticks to wax. So I put the queen cell in there and they attach it, and things are just fine and dandy. So once you get those cells, they're easy to take off your frame and move around to other places that you might want to insert a queen cell. And it's very easy to requeen with a queen cell, sometimes compared to a virgin queen or compared to a bred queen. If you're having a hard time getting a colony requeened, it's a little easier to lose a queen cell than it is to lose an expensive queen that you purchased. So my apiary growth, this picture was August 14th. And it was what I did. What I had here was some colonies I was growing that were nukes that I was growing up to double colonies. And then these are double nukes. This is a close-up picture. There's supposed to be 5 frames on this side and 5 frames on that side, but I bought these pre-made, and they use such a big divider board in the center. I couldn't fit 5 frames in. They would just be jammed in there so tight I couldn't get them out without rolling bees, which I don't like. But then 4 frames made some burr comb, so I adjusted the space with some thin insulation board. And then they have 4 frames on the box. So these are my older queens that I pulled out of the boxes that I was making my new queens in. And I just kept let them draw foundation, make brood, draw foundation, and make brood. And by September, they were all about, these are 4 frame boxes. They were all 3 high with extra frames and brood and everything. So I split them down to several colonies. And then I had extra queens that I had made over here, over there, and over here. And you can't see, there's 2 small nukes over here and a queen castle with divided with 3 frames in each side. They all had queens. So they were just making brood and drawing frames for me to feed these colonies to get everything strong enough for the winter. Because I started last spring with 6 colonies, and I now have 17. I had 17, I lost 1. So, I mean, I did want to grow my apiary. Not everybody does. Some people just want new queens. I don't want to go over 25 colonies maybe, because my job is pretty intense. But I find bees really want to reproduce. So either you got to split them and sell nukes, or you've got to increase. I've never had a problem with my bees not wanting to grow and produce more bees. So so in the last week of May 2022, I started with 5 double deep boxes of bees and queens from 2020. And I grew the colony to that. So I made those double deeps that I was making queen cells in. They made 20 queen cells for me, but I also made some queen cells in this yard. They made 177 pounds of honey. I got 6 new colonies to winter over from them, and I was able to go up to 17 colonies between all the splitting I did. And at the end of August, I combined the extra colonies, these nuke boxes to make a colony, and I gave 5 extra queens away at the end of August. So that's my story. So in the winter here, from November to February, basically my bees are buried in snow. There's what I did this winter, which I really liked, was I started the winter with a bottom entrance, and they had no upper entrance. And what I do at the end of February, I will check their food. And so there's 2 colonies pushed together and insulated. And on the inner cover, I have that Reflectix bubble insulation. Then I have a solid foam board on each individual colony. They have that reflective insulation. Then they have solid foam board. And then both colonies get one big piece of foam board over them. And then they're all strapped together. So in February, the end of February, I want to make sure they have enough food stores. So usually the snow is up right over the top of the colony. I clear off the top of the colony, and I lay down a blanket and have everything ready I need. And I'm kneeling on a blanket. I have the snowshoe out here and drag it tobogganing to do this, and have everything I need right beside me. I take off this big board, and then I open each individual colony very quickly. I put on a rim, I put on a piece of newspaper that's pre-cut to the size I need, and I have a 5-gallon bucket with sugar with a scoop in it. That's the amount of sugar that I want to put on. Boom, 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 done in 8 seconds. Close them up, close that side up, do the next side, and move down through the yard. But also when I do that, at the end of February, we start having some days where the bees can have a cleansing flight. And by then the snow is kind of come down and compacted on this entrance. And I know all my bees are in the upper box. So I open my top entrance, and the bees can fly to do cleansing flights. And then I cleaned the snow out on March 13th. And to get my electric fencing back up, I have to take down, we have so much snow that the snow breaks. The first year I left the wires on the fencing, and it broke all the wires. The snow broke all the wires. It was just too much snow. And so last year I rolled all the wire up, and then when I knew the bears were starting to start roaming around, I cleared up the fence with my tractor and put the wire back out and the charger back out. And it's not just bears. We have really the fattest raccoons I ever saw in my life. And they would just rip right through a colony like nothing too. I mean, really, I had 2 on my game camera all the time, and I called them Hubba and Bubba. They were like this big around. They were the fattest raccoons I ever saw. So that's how I did last winter, and my bees came through so strong. I lost one colony way down there towards the end of, later spring. They ended up with no SEMA. They just kind of dwindled away, but nobody else had signs or anything. I did a microscopy test, and definitely it was no SEMA. But everybody else came through very, very strong. So I will be splitting to prevent swarming, or getting a lot of honey supers on them, and, doing what I need to do. But that's basically what I did last year. I put sugar on them, and then in March, around this time when we're cleaning out the snow, I went back and I put fondant on them, and then I put a pollen patty on them also, so they would really start brooding up for me. And that's one of the reasons they're so strong right now. I mean, I kind of got them to grow. If I didn't do that, they wouldn't have starved, but they wouldn't be so full either. So right now, when I open one of those colonies, when I checked them a few weeks ago and I pulled a few frames, I could look down through to the bottom box, and the bottom box was just 10 frames of bees, and the top box is just 10 frames of bees. So they're starting out good. So Well, and I'll tell you that when I pulled both those queens, when I pulled the queens and I had each box make a queen, that gave them a nice brood break for Varroa control too. I really had very few Varroa came fall. I still, of course, I did oxalic acid vaporization, but I had very, very few Varroa. And I'm not out to make thousands of pounds of honey because I find honey is just absolute lot of work. I don't really enjoy selling honey. I eat a lot of honey and I do all my cooking with honey, but they still made adequate amount of honey. And then my other colonies that were wintered over, that the 6, they made a lot of honey. So I had more than enough honey. So okay, that is my last slide.
That was awesome, Karen. I have let's see, I have a couple of questions. I don't know if Etienne, do you have any questions or comments? Canadian to Canadian?
I was going to say, very thorough presentation. I'm not sure if I'll be asking Dewey to give you a call to see if you want to do one of our mini conferences that was. But nope, because the approach you take around using emergency cells and all that type of stuff is the way I learned trial by fire. Because I just found it easier, because my first book was Beekeeping for Dummies.
Okay.
And in there it says about scraping all these things off, all the cells off. But then keeping bees in the Yukon and shipping a Nook up here this year is $400 and some. I just bought 5 queens, and it cost me $80 a queen.
Yeah.
So you can see how I needed the queens, and I also feed pollen patties early April to get them to brood rear. And I just split one 4 ways to put my 4 queens in, because there's just so many bees. But I was going to say, from any learnings or mistakes or common things that beginners might do when trying to do this for the first time, things that you've noticed, and they might be, for somebody who's kept bees for say 5 to 10 years, it's intuitive, but a person, because this is what I recommend, is get yourself a Nook, move the old queen to a new box, do an artificial swarm type thing, and then either buy a queen or raise your own queen in that empty box. So what are things that a 2-year-old, 3-year-old type beekeeper might make?
Well, first of all, they always have a hard time finding this queen. So I would really recommend the shaker tub for that. Or I have a really great method I use for finding queens, where I have 2 empty boxes. I pull a frame, I look for the queen, I put it in the box away from the wall. Then I pull my second frame, I look for the queen, I put it against that frame. And then from then on forward, it's always 2 frames together this far apart. So if I don't find my queen, I have to go back through. I only have to look between the 2 frames, because she's not going to be on the outside, because they don't like daylight. She's going to be somewhere between 2 frames. So I really reduce where I have to look for that queen. So I would basically help them learn how to find the queen, because that's where I find beginners really mess up. And also help them learn how to see eggs. Beginners have a really hard time seeing eggs. Other than that, I just got to help them have confidence that their bees can do this, because their bees are doing this. They're setting the bees up for the right way to do it. The bees are doing the work. So it's a matter of being able to identify eggs, find the queen, and know how much food is enough food, and identify a nectar flow. Beginners have a hard time knowing when a nectar flow stops and when a nectar flow starts and stops. So, but those are basic things that they need to learn as a beekeeper. It's not that they have to learn anything extra to do this method. They just have to become a better beekeeper overall to keep their bees alive. So I can't really think of anything other than, getting the proper equipment. And usually, they'd have to buy a double screen board or make a double screen board. But there is, if they only want one queen, then they can use that queen excluder with a little bit of cardboard covering part of it. But then they've got to realize that they've got to be right on top of their timing, because the virgin, well, most likely the virgin is going to kill the older queen, because she can move around like a Volkswagen and the older queen moves around like a Max trucks, So the virgin queen is running circles around that older queen. But I don't really see a ton of problems with the beginners, other than they also might get overwhelmed because it's a lot of information. But I don't find it a lot of manipulation. The most manipulation is the first day when you're setting up the colony. And after that, there's not a lot of manipulation. Being able to categorize the frames into food, brood, cap brood, eggs. But I should think if they're, I really believe everybody that does beekeeping needs to take a class and have a mentor. And, if they have those things under their belt, they really should be able to do that without a huge issue.
So that's where, like, when you're equalizing the hive before you do this, you put 2 new boxes out and just sort brood frame left, brood frame right,
Right.
milk brood left, milk brood right, resource left, resource right. And that's the way you end up with a perfectly even, because you're dividing them out as you pull them out, and you end up with the original box is now your extra box.
Yeah, I can either swap out. Well, what I'm doing first, I divide them up, and then I use their boxes that they've had, and I put them back the way I want them. So that you do need that extra equipment of boxes or some type of tub or something that's going to hold this size frames that you're using, whether you're using mediums or deeps.
So once you get 20 frames divided into 2 boxes, 2 new boxes, you move them back into those original boxes.
Yeah, because then they're divided, and now I'm putting them back together. So I just get now the box is empty. That was the bottom box. I put it down and I take the resources from each of my other boxes. And that's where a beginner could get into trouble, maybe, is, setting it up correctly. With the food and the resources that they need, or not having enough and not realizing they have to feed, or they have to put on a pollen patty for the protein for those nurse bees. They have to know about the colony resources, I guess. When in doubt, feed.
Right. And you always move the queen to a different yard, or?
No, I don't. It depends on if I tend to take forages for that nuke, because I want the young bees divided between the 2 boxes that are making the queen. I want the young bees making my queens. So I tend to take forages when I make up that first nuke. I do it in the morning when the forages are home. And that's a hard time to find a queen because the boxes are really full. So for a beginner, they might have to go 2 days or 3 days ahead of time and slip in a queen excluder so they know where their queen is. It makes it a little easier to find the queen if they're going to take forages. Because I was doing 2 boxes, I wanted every young bee I could get in there. If I'm only going to make 1 queen, and I shake all the bees to the bottom box, and then I put my open brood and everything in the top box, and I know the queen's in the bottom box now because I've shaken them down, and I put my resources in the top box with a queen excluder, young bees are going up because that's where the open brood is. So that box is going to be full of young bees. So they don't even have to worry about young bees if they're not making a nuke. And then they go back the next day, they pull out the queen excluder, they slip in their snell grove board, and they're good to go if they're not planning on increase or making 2 colonies out of it, because it's the young bees that are going to go up through that queen excluder to be on that open brood. Then I would put all the open brood in the top. So I don't, I mean, I do teach a lot of beginner classes, but since I moved, I used to mentor a lot of beginners. And so since I've moved up here, I haven't been around that many beginners. You know, as the bee inspector, I mostly inspect the commercial yards and the people that are pollinating. Not, we have a lot of hobbyists in New Brunswick, and I help them if they have a problem. But I guess I've kind of, I hate to say it, I'm losing touch with the beginners, but they're going to start some education classes here, so I'll start working with beginners again. But you know, it's they all have, they're intimidated by bees when they start. So I just say, wear as many things as you need to wear to be comfortable when you do this. Where if you need to wear gloves, if you need to wear your bee suit, if you need to wear duct tape around your ankles, whatever you need. If you're physically comfortable, you're going to work with a lot more confidence and not rush through things. And the other thing I say is to move like you're practicing Tai Chi. Just move calmly, smoothly, and slowly, and your bees aren't going to get all bent out of shape. And that's what I tell, you know, if you're well protected, so you're not nervous. I don't use a lot of smoke when I do that, but if they have their smoker lit so they're comfortable, and it's just it's not a hard process, but I guess getting into the right down to the bottom of 2 boxes can be intimidating.
You mentioned Nosema at the end there. Do
Yeah.
you reuse those frames, or do you? What's your method for keeping your wax clean? Do you do anything?
Well, I was lucky that it happened at the end of the season and they didn't mess up the inside of the hive. And I'm going to try a new product that came out when COVID came out, which is called germicidal bleach. And it is said that you can make, a weak bleach solution and put your frames down into that, weight them down so they sink, and soak them in a tub of the bleach, and then rinse them really well, and then put them in the sun, which is also a great germ killer. And the frame should be good to go. I am going to try that this year and see how that goes. So I have the provincial vet hunting down germicidal bleach for me because I couldn't really find it. So I know they make it, but because I heard, I don't know where I heard about that. I heard it in a talk, in a bee talk this winter. But anyway, so that's what I'm trying.
Do you have, is this precautionary, or is there, I know that we want to be careful about passing illness from a dead out, to a new hive. But it's hard for people if they don't have a microscope to distinguish between dysentery and nosema. So
it is. I would recommend you take a sample of bees and send it to somebody with a microscope. If you really want to know if it's nosema or dysentery, that's the only way to tell is with a microscope. I have 13 microscopes, all the exact same kind, because I was teaching microscopy classes before COVID started, and then I couldn't teach anymore. But I really do want to start up again. And anyway, so I've trained a lot of people to check for nosema in Maine. And then I was teaching that in Canada before I actually moved here. So we had a good system in Maine where there was probably in each club, there were probably 10 or 12 people, because the clubs are big down there, that other beekeepers could give bees to check for nosema. So I would really like, if you don't have someone, you can always send it out to your provincial apiarist too. Send
So
your sample out.
if it's determined that it's dysentery and not nosema, would you reuse those frames with a little cleaning?
It would depend on how messy they are. I've seen some frames that I just don't even want to touch without gloves on. So yeah,
but
yeah.
On the scale of towards less messy than
towards less messy, I would scrub them up and I would clean them up and reuse them. Okay. Soak them in a weak bleach solution, and they have chlorine test strips that you can test your bleach solution, and 200 parts per million, if I remember that correctly, is a good solution for using bleach to kill germy things. So, and in Maine, we had a different system for selling honey. I actually had to clean my jars and then soak them in 200 parts per million of bleach. And I had to have test strips and then air dry them before I could bottle honey into them. So I figured out a cap full of bleach from a regular bleach bottle cap into a gallon of water creates 200 parts per million of bleach water. So I didn't have to measure it out every time. But anyway, it's really what you're comfortable with, and how much you're willing to replace equipment. If there's a little bit of mess on the frames and I know I can clean it up, I'd rather not throw it away, because frames and foundation is very expensive. Foundation's gone up a lot in price the past year. So,
and I guess the reason I ask is so I have my own microscope and I've been doing microscopy for a while. And a few years back, I linked up, I knew I had nosema, but then I also had amoeba disease. So I had that co-infection. And I scraped the feces off the frames and it was just full of nosema and amoeba spores.
Yeah.
So, and I keep getting 1 or 2 colonies every year that has amoeba and nosema. And every year now, like this year, I'm going to get rid of 40 frames. Last year, I got rid of 40 frames, just because it's endemic and it seems to come back like in April. I'll have a box with 16 frames of bees and it'll be dead within a month and a half.
So are they picking up the amoeba from the environment?
I think they're getting it from the equipment, and like reading Bailey's studies and a few other studies, it's looking like, I guess he tested it for acetic acid fumigation. So I was going to try that because I can get myself an old freezer and some acetic acid to fumigate my gear. But and I sort of did the history since 2017, since I first noticed it, that it's likely through the equipment that I'm getting it. So last year I started really cleaning things up. And I still got one this winter.
Yeah. So initially you brought it into the apiary with bees?
It likely was, because there's no beekeepers where I'm at, and there never was. So it was probably, 2017, I had crazy honeydew honey. That I didn't really know back then. And it was really, really low in sugar. And the bees just pooped everywhere. And they died. So I have a feeling that's where it became endemic in my bee yards. And the following years, it's always 10-20% of my bees get it. So it's my only loss. So I'm trying to get rid of it.
Yeah. I wonder if the germicidal bleach would help with that,
That's why I was asking.
Yeah. You'd have to test it out. Unfortunately, that would involve killing some bees if it didn't work.
Which I don't mind doing. I collect a lot of live samples to do dissect the gut out and check the tubules out. So Cool.
So.
All right. Val, you're hanging in there. Did you have any questions before we wrap it up?
No, not really. This was really, really interesting. I know my second year through not necessarily error, but just circumstances, I ended up kind of creating that situation. And I thought, wow, that was really easy to make a queen. But I think I've got a couple of colonies that I might try and do that with, because like you said, they're just wonderful to work with. They got good, honey producing. They're good foragers. So this has really kind of reminded me of that again.
Yeah, it was how I started raising queens. I don't even remember how, when I started with bees back in 1978, I didn't know any other beekeepers except for a bunch of old men. And I was in my 20s, and they were more than willing to help me. They was just so generous with their time. And I probably got that from them. And I got a lot of common sense from them, beekeeping common sense. And I've always raised livestock. So, I know about keeping things well fed and well cared for. It was just, I was so lucky to get those mentors to help me out. They were all veterans, and they had their own little bee group. There were 3 of them. And I decided I wanted to be a beekeeper. I sent out letters to the local police departments saying, if anybody has a swarm, please call me. I did take a beekeeping class, but I had never touched a bee really in my life, other than helping somebody. I worked on a farm, and I helped the neighbor with their bees a few times, but not catching swarms or anything like that. And I went out and I got swarms, and I filled my boxes up and started. So.
Well, thank you so much, Karen. I mean, it goes so much. We're trying to make progress towards a sustainability culture here. We're trying to get people to realize they can make their own queens. They can get their colonies through the winter, and we can become less dependent on California almond bees as our source. And the vagaries of the weather there, and shipping problems, and the fact that they don't do any selection for the traits that we need and likely that you need here, which is hopefully some varroa resistance, and certainly the ability to make it through winter. Yeah. So I just really appreciate you taking the time to do this for us.
When I moved up here and I had to buy bees to restart, I hadn't, other than bringing new queens every once in a while into my apiary for different genetics, I was totally sustainable of my own. I hadn't bought a nuke or a package or anything for probably 20 years or better. I always, as I said, my bees like to reproduce. I usually have more bees than I want. Of course, like most people, when Varroa first started, I did lose quite a few colonies, but not enough that I had to, purchase bees to start up again. I just started splitting and growing more colonies. But I can say I have never had big losses. I've been very fortunate with that. And even since I moved up here, I did lose 1 colony this year. And it's a whole new environment for me up here. It's the weather's quite different than Maine, but I can adapt, and my bees adapt. So we're all doing well together. Well,
again, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. Any parting shots from anyone else?
No, this was awesome. Thank you.
Hey.
All right. Thanks. Well, have a great evening, you guys. And I'm sure I'll be in touch in one way or another.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right.
See you. Bye.
Bye.